As Australians wait for news of a two-way travel bubble with New Zealand, the federal government is promising a ramp-up of the country's sluggish vaccination rollout. 4,000 GP clinics are expected to be giving the jab by the end of the month, up from 1,000 currently involved in the program.
842,000 doses have been administered so far, but that's well short of the target of 4 million by the end of last month. But the country should see a payoff for its efforts to remain COVID-free later today, with New Zealand's Prime Minister set to announce details of a trans-Tasman travel bubble. Straight to Tom Lowry at Parliament House. Good morning, Tom. Well, looks like travel to New Zealand could be on the cards pretty soon.
Yeah, it looks like it's going to happen. We just don't know what it's going to look like when it does. This is going to be a huge announcement for the tourism sectors in both countries. This is a sector worth billions of dollars with millions of travellers heading between these two countries every year in an ordinary year. This, of course, isn't quite an ordinary year because we just don't know what this bubble is going to look like once it's announced. The first question to be answered is what the start date is going to be. There are some within the federal government suggesting maybe it might be later on this week. There are others saying it might be later on this month. The other question is which parts of Australia New Zealand is going to actually open up to, because Jacinda Ardern, the New Zealand Prime Minister, has previously flagged she's talking to states on a bit of a state-by-state basis. So we could see New Zealand opening to some parts of Australia and not others. One thing that will be interesting to see is what the New Zealand Prime Minister makes of how Australia handled that most recent outbreak in Brisbane and northern New South Wales last week. Obviously, Queensland and New South Wales authorities were quite quick to get on top of that outbreak. It does seem to be largely contained, but of course state borders did come crashing down in many cases once again, which perhaps isn't surprising given that Brisbane asked, or the Queensland government asked, for that area to be declared a national hotspot. So we'll see what New Zealand authorities make of exactly how that was handled. One thing we do know for sure is the airlines are very keen for this to happen. There are some airlines already offering tickets for many flights a day between New Zealand and Australia for later on this month. So they're pretty keen to see this bubble up and running as you'd expect.
Yeah, Tom, it comes as we're still discussing whether the vaccination rollout here in Australia has been sluggish or whether we're just being impatient. We saw the acting chief medical officer yesterday talking about this increase in the number of GP clinics that are going to be involved in distributing the vaccines.
Yeah, and that really comes down to confidence, doesn't it? When you're thinking about things like the New Zealand travel bubble, will people be confident to travel until they're vaccinated? And the vaccine rollout hasn't been as fast as was expected so far. The target was for 4 million doses by around about this time of the year. That obviously hasn't been possible because of the difficulties accessing international doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine. We're expecting 3.8 million. We've had about 700,000 doses so far, and that puts so much pressure on the local manufacturer of the AstraZeneca vaccine, CSL, to pump out as many doses as they possibly can. They want to be up around 1 million doses a week. They're currently around about the 800 to 850,000 mark so far, and they don't know when they'll get up to that 1 million target. The federal government's leaning on GPs to accelerate the rollout as much as they possibly can. We've got 1,000 or so, 1,500 maybe GPs as part of the rollout so far. The government wants to get that to 3,000 or so by the end of this week. But the handbrake there is how many doses GPs are actually being given to administer. They need doses in their hands to put in people's arms, and that comes down to how fast we can make them, get them approved by the TGA and to those GPs. One other conversation that's being had is between the federal government and the states as to what extra role the states can play, if they can set up mass vaccination hubs to get more vaccines out there, perhaps using the model they used for healthcare workers so far. So we'll see more discussions being had around that too as we just try and get more vaccine doses into people.